A box is smashed, a farewell bash, and taking out the trash. It's October 2011, and this is Yesterzine. 12 years ago, an almost forgotten issue of PC Gamer was produced. On first glance, it was nothing out the ordinary. Nice subscriber cover, cover DVD, 132 pages, decent review section. Limbo is your top scorer, and Garbage Truck Simulator the low. At the decade mark, this had actually been penciled in as an episode of Yesterzine, but it never happened. Why didn't it, and why should you pretend to care? Well, the answer to question 2 is that this issue really is special. As far as I can tell, PC Gamer was the last UK games magazine to mount a regular cover disc, and this is the last issue of it to do so. After physical media being an integral part of computer magazines constantly since the mid-80s, they were now, officially, dead. There was surprisingly little ceremony. Editor Tim Edwards mentions plans for the magazine, including a new digital edition and giveaways for games and DLC. But as he reveals in the second half of a sentence, the disc is dead. In exchange, you get all the above and a promise to increase the page count massively. If you don't think I'm testing that claim, then you're new here. Hello. The magazine stayed the same price, but the next month it grew from 132 to a chunky 196 pages. November Tim takes the chance to explain further, revealing that the magazine had inadvertently become one of the UK's largest producers of DVD software, this being very much at the transition of PC distribution to Steam and its friends. Also, everything they put on them was generally available online for free, and that the money could be better spent on the magazine. So they were. What doesn't hold up so well immediately is his promise of codes for, I remind you, games, trials and DLC. What that amounts to at this first opportunity is a hat for a multiplayer shooter and a free trial to OnLive, the service that badly streamed video games before Stadia badly streamed video games, and long before PlayStation and Amazon badly streamed video games. And of course, a free trial isn't a gift. Any service worth its salt throws these out like it's a batch of unused cover discs. You needed to sign up with a card, and would get charged the second the trial was up. If you already had OnLive, you get nothing. Predictably, and presumably assuming people already stopped looking, by the next month half of the extra pages had already melted away. Again, the free gifts are a bit iffy. A couple of crappy in-game items and 6 free games from GOG. The latter sounds like a good deal, but you could only get Ultima 4, Beneath the Steel Sky, Tyrion 2000, Lore of the Temptress, Teen Agent and Dragonsphere if you'd never bought from GOG before. PC Gamer know this is shit, so literally tell you to make a fake account to get them, which given GOG games are just a DRM-free installer, results in the exact same outcome. It's a fairly petty restriction, and in fact these days, all but Dragonsphere are free to everyone on the site anyway. Predictably, there follows a long slow regression to the mean. If we check in 2 years later, the magazine was back to its cover disc equipped page count, and the free gift was some items for the free-to-play online shooter Warframe, which, as of 2023, is still considered to be in beta. Although, to be fair, is also still supported. A lovely subject for an episode, this. The lowest review is Garbage Truck Simulator, and you know you need to see what the hell that's like. And the treasures of the last cover disc are exactly the kind of thing this show trades off. So why didn't it appear on the 10th anniversary? Well, it didn't exist. Oh, the magazine did, sure. There's a perfectly viable scan, albeit slightly ruined by gigantic watermarks for World Mags. But the disc? Gone. I tried for a month before deadlines got the better of me. I even bought Garbage Simulator 2011 for actual real money in anticipation. Astonishingly, that was still available. The disc isn't on archive.org. It's not on any dodgy site I know. If you're wondering what you got instead, it was Supermarket Brown, the Yesterzine episode that centred on Amstrad Action and the Dizzy games. I've idly searched on eBay when I've remembered without success. The magazine pops up from time to time. There's a copy on there right now for an optimistic price, but the disc? Never. Until last month. Jackpot. I bid. I kept very quiet about it, and I won it for a sane price. So 2 years belated, here we are. Please stand and remove your hats in respect to the death of the cover disc. An obvious fact you probably haven't considered. In what order is a magazine written? Because this is the thing about a monthly magazine. You know when you get it, the information in it is 2 weeks old. Because that's the time between your average publishing deadline and a lump of highly processed wood pulp being pushed through your house's mail hole. You can't write a magazine entirely on the last day though, although late arriving review copies certainly meant better magazines than PC Gamer have had to try. Unless you sit around doing nothing except impromptu sensible soccer tournaments for 3 weeks, then you've got to at least get some work done as much as 6 weeks before the issue on sale date. There are some clues to this, and let's pick on last month's friend Retro Gamer for a demonstration. This is the letters page of 243. This letter, from Matthew Jones, refers to walking home with this month's Retro Gamer, and its Turtles themed cover. That, though, is issue 241, from 2 months previously, and the reason for that is the letters page is not time sensitive, and is frequently written first. The letters page for 243 was probably complete and finalised before 242 even went on sale. In general, the regular pages are sorted first, obvious stuff like updating review guides and your subscription offers. Then the not time limited features. For instance, this issue has a feature on a game called Project Zomboid, whose timeline finishes in July, almost exactly 6 weeks before the launch of the issue. In the event, the game wasn't released for another 2 years, but in 2023 PC Gamer still consider it the 73rd best game of all time. And for how I know that, listen on. The rest you're at the mercy of review copies arriving. For a news and reviews based magazine like PC Gamer, huge amounts of the work are in the last 2 weeks, as the games you were faithfully promised would turn up in time are thrown under an Indiana Jones style closing door. It's for this reason we recently saw Amiga Power give up and review an unfinished version or two, and sometimes you had what AP called contingency reviews. These would be less mainstream but timely games that you only review if something more popular falls through. In the last section of this episode we'll be looking at the lowest scoring game in the issue, and I'm pretty convinced it's only reviewed at all because something didn't turn up, especially as it's bang in the middle of the reviews section. The point of this preamble is, I'm interested when the decision to make this the last cover disc was made. The editor's letter and the contents page are the only places its demise is mentioned, and PC Gamer by this point devoted no paper space to the disc, beyond that flash on the contents page. The editor's letter and contents are about the last thing to be written, because you have to know what's definitively in the issue to write either. This is why, sometimes when a magazine closes, the only place they acknowledge that is the editor's letter, because the decision was made after the rest was written. This is actually also true of this show. Other than this exact line you're hearing now, the last thing in this entire episode to be written was the cold open at the start, for the same reason. Conversely, aside from late arriving demos, most of a cover disc, especially one with a lot of extra and stock material like Gamers, could be made a long time in advance. So I'm going out on a limb and saying what you're about to see, the disc we're about to look through, was largely compiled before the decision was made, before virtually everything you'd read in the issue, and crucially, before someone made the decision to jam the best demos of all time on the cover for it. There is an immediate problem in trying to find out on a modern system. You can't run the cover disc. The menu system requires Adobe, previously Macromedia, Flash. And this is not the time to dig down into that divisive technology that dominated the interactive web for several years. Suffice to say, we're going to be, as they advise, browsing this disc manually. Certainly a good portion of the demos would have appeared either way. For example, here's the first game mentioned, Chatterlee's A Tale of Two Sisters, whose UK release was right in the middle of this issue's production cycle. It's a perfectly nice little thing, but it probably only exists in the UK thanks to the breakout success of Easy Game Station's newer, but previously translated game, Racketeer, an item shop's tale. Racketeer is adorable, by the way. An independent Japanese RPG about a woman who runs one of the item shops you always see in RPGs. If you were going for the best demos ever, it's that you'd have included, surely. And so we turn to the cover. Because while it both promises 11 demos and the best demos of all time, it only names 2, Deus Ex and Unreal. From a PC gamer perspective, can't argue with that first one. The previous month they reviewed the prequel Human Revolution, and straight in the strapline of that, they described this as the greatest game of all time. That wasn't for effect either. Earlier in the year, in their most recent top 100, Deus Ex was indeed number 1. This led me to look up the 2023 list referenced a minute ago. At 23 years old, it's still 63 in their list. That issue also includes a feature on said prequel. Playing Deus Ex today is trickier. The demo doesn't run on a modern Windows, or rather it might, but the WinZip-based installer dies trying to find out. You can play the full game easily enough though by buying it from GOG, where, via whatever witchcraft they normally use, it works immediately. You've been watching me running the tutorial on that, which ends when I softlock myself by pickpocketing the key for the next section, then accidentally doubling back past the guard who confiscates your equipment, and thus I lose the only key forever. If nothing else, it serves as a giveaway as to the age of this game. This issue's Human Revolution and its more recent sequel Mankind Divided might be an easier visit. Revolution gets 94% from PC Gamer, although is notably missing from a modern top 100. The other game named is Unreal, a groundbreaking first-person shooter with a killer soundtrack whose legacy is enormous. Next time you boot up any recent game, keep an eye out. There is every chance you'll find a credit for the Unreal Engine, which underpins titles as diverse as Borderlands, Yoshi's Crafted World, and the Final Fantasy VII remake. And the Mandalorian TV series. Not even kidding. Yet I feel Unreal the game gets overlooked. It was the PC FPS to play between Quake and Half-Life. It was the last big game to hit while my friends and I were at secondary school and before we went to university. And just look at this intro crawl. This game is barely newer than Duke Nukem 3D and Quake. It's the same age as the first Half-Life. And the greatest respect to Valve, but you're going to find out in a couple of minutes that Half-Life looks nothing as good. If the PlayStation had taken consoles past the PC just a few short years earlier, this was conclusive proof that for now the PCs were back in front. The water effects tell you that on their own. You can see how this spawned such a famous game engine. But people don't remember it. If they even know Unreal started as a game series, they know of the spin-off multiplayer series Tournament, created as a rival to the similar multiplayer theming of id's Quake 3 Arena, and released a single day after that title in Europe. So it's nice to see it getting proper respect on this disc as one of the best games ever. Oh, for the love of Megagame. Yeah, even in 2011, despite saying Unreal on the cover, this disc contains a demo instead for the first Unreal Tournament. In 2023, neither of these games nor their sequels make a top 100 list, although Tournament is 24 in the 2011 version. This is an old school DVD. To access half the content, you have to flip over to the other side. On that second side is the other obvious best game of all time inclusion, the aforementioned Quake 3 Arena. At least in 2011 this appeared to have aged worse than Unreal, but it does make the top 100 at 51. The remaining really interesting demo comes next, Half-Life Uplink. And I had to look up what it even is. What Uplink turns out to be is a second later demo, which actually consists of part of the game that was cut from the initial release. I'm told if you know Half-Life, this is roughly from around Lambda Core section of the game. But for the rest of us, it's during the evacuation after the incident that starts the game. It's an interesting comparison with where we've just been, because Half-Life is the other FPS probably even more credited with building a world and atmosphere than Unreal was. The demo has a bit to recover from, as its bold boasts of getting Game of the Year for everyone are slightly ruined by the fact that what you're seeing is zoomed in from a window that was 2 centimeters wide on my monitor. The main game is full screen though, and half the building collapses on you as you make your way to the scientists who would love to escape, but the door won't be released until an official all clear, which can only be issued from the other side of many radiation leaks. That works for us. We've got the suit by this point and off we go to try and fix it. The soldier says he'll stay here to guard the area, then immediately buggers off as you take the lift up. Half-Life 1 still looks good, although despite this being a full Direct 3D version, it's not a patch on Unreal. This is probably because underneath, Half-Life uses a modified Quake engine, and not the later, much more ubiquitous Source engine used in the sequels, and indeed a remake of this very game. There's other areas it's not aged well. Overall, I don't think this demo gives a good account of the Half-Life experience. For a start, the early part of the level sees you smacking headcrabs with a crowbar, which is incredibly awkward busy work. It's followed by a section with many headcrabs and another monster, where you should have a gun, but it's very easy to miss in a room whose door barely works, so I don't see it the first time. And there's many first times, because then there's a small puzzle where you have to crouch and destroy 2 barriers, while remembering to jump the laser in the middle. I may be judging on today's standards, and I really need to engineer Half-Life itself being in this show at some point, but this essentially vanilla 1999 release has a weird inertia to its movement, and more than once I either land on or slide into the lasers, and the irritating location at the restart point is before the 5 headcrabs. When I get through, you need that gun to deal with the HECU soldiers who are there to kill the entire civilian population to prevent leaks. Using the gun, we dispatch them, solve another puzzle to get out of the room, kill a few more, and then change back to the crowbar to get rid of a box that's in the way, at which point what looks like a turret kills me. And the restart point is right back at the headcrabs. I've played enough of the demo. This is no longer the way to get a sense of Half-Life, if it ever was. Half-Life absolutely is in the conversation of greatest PC games. This demo is not remotely in the conversation for best demos. If you come to it cold, it explains very little of what I just told you. Some men who look exactly like the other men are just shooting you for some reason, and most of the atmosphere is missing. As a choice at the time for this disc, it's probably as good as anything, although Half-Life 2 was available. Certainly though, it's a valid choice of game. You may not feel the same about the next one. Peggle though, is super popular and was the casual game trendsetter when most people's idea of that was just Solitaire and Minesweeper. Ironically, Peggle's breakout moment came when a demo was included in Valve's Orange Box compilation, which also included all 3 Half-Life 2 branded games. Incidentally, if you're seeing this and fancy playing Peggle again, do not download the mobile version. And not for once, because it's a freemium grindy hellhole they deleted the real versions in favour of. It is those things, don't get me wrong, but more importantly there's a bug where if you hit more than a couple of orange pegs in a row, it stops counting them, but does remove them, making it impossible to complete the level. Judging by the reviews, this hasn't been fixed in at least 2 years, and because of the level design, it is impossible to finish one of the first group of levels because of it. Electronic Arts, everyone! We could look at the more recent of the 11 demos on the disc, but they're mostly unremarkable games that didn't make a long-term impact. The era of magazine cover discs ends with the headline being a demo of Supreme Ruler Cold War, possibly the most generic name ever given to a video game. The third of what is now 8 games in this series by BattleGoat carries mixed reviews on Steam a decade on. The most recent, Supreme Ruler 2030, is mostly negative. The mostly positive on the poorly named 2014 release Supreme Ruler Ultimate appears to be their high watermark. The real gem of the disc, historically speaking though, is buried in the indie section. More so than any of the 2011 games on the disc, it's what's technically a 2015 game that made the biggest impact. Kerbal Space Program. 2 years before it even hit Steam's early access, was at this point being directly distributed by developers Squad, and it's this version that appears here. A footnote on the cover disc, sure, but in 2023, Kerbal Space Program is at 28 in PC Gamer's Top 100. It's comfortably the highest of anything on this disc. When they described the disc as having the PC's greatest games, they were apparently right. By accident. There is more to this disc, of course. Filler content had been part of cover discs as soon as they went optical, and no one could sign enough stuff to actually fill a disc. The standard classic sections are here. There's some videos of upcoming releases, all of which would have been on YouTube at this point, of course. None of them are the games that are demoed, which meant a lot more work for me, but probably makes sense for everyone else. Ironically, there's probably more great games here than there were in the demos. Batman Arkham City, Battlefield 3, Payday, Saints Row the Third, Star Wars Old Republic, and Tomb Raider 2010 all had big impacts on the modern gaming scene. Could possibly say the same of League of Legends as well, which makes a quiet appearance in the gallery section, although its personal impact on me is mostly one of being really irritated by its YouTube ads. Flipping to side B, we have a bunch of mods, mostly for Fallout 3. All easy to download of course, but there's some cool stuff here. We'll need to do a thing on mods and how much difference they make to PC games sometime. But suffice to say, one of the items here is Fallout 3 Real-Time Settler, a mod that turns the game into a full Sim City of a thing, where you can build an entire self-sufficient wasteland town from scratch. More weird is the patches section. I get that it's still nice, even in 2011, to put patches on the disc for people who didn't have proper internet at home. What I understand less is why 2 of the 3 patches are for entirely online game World of Warcraft and entirely online game World of Tanks. I suspect both were still sold on disc, I know Warcraft was, but how you were playing them without good internet I have no idea. And by the time PC Gamer's Lead Times got this disc to you, chances are it was 6 versions behind anyway. The cover disc era goes out with a whimper, with standard rolling content. A few useful resources, most notably a reviews database of everything PC Gamer had covered up until a year earlier, which is going to be mostly useful to me. There's also a general starter's guide to PC gaming that would now be released as a £15 bookazine your nan buys you. Beyond that, it's disastrously out-of-date utility software, which at least gives us an insight into how long-lived some of the classics are. Graphics cards are still Nvidia versus ATI, for instance, as it is here. 7-zip is still the compression pro choice. FileZilla is still my FTP client, and Media Player Classic still in constant use. DOSBox and ScumVM were both used to produce Yesterzines in very recent memory too. Conversely, PDFs are now just a browser thing for most people, and virtually every protocol the once essential Miranda IM supported is long dead, or worse, Twitter. No one defrags their drives anymore because they're all SSDs, and MuTorrent lived long enough to see itself become the villain, so to speak. You see what I mean by now, I guess. I think this was retconned into being the last cover disc with the hasty addition of a few half-decade-old demos of classics. But designed as the last or not, that's what this appears to be, at least for games-focused magazines. The console mags had already stopped, and while the likes of PC Pro carried on a while with them, they were clearly increasingly pointless. By 2011, what had once been the making of magazines was now a millstone they could ill afford to drag. So let's talk simulations. Now, I don't mean, say, Gran Turismo, or any of Microprose's 40 years of offerings here. I mean the mundane thing simulator genre. It's been a low-key success for a decade now, especially on PC. Euro Truck Sim 2 became a media darling for a while a few years back, for instance. If you've not encountered it, it's a realistic sim of being a long-distance trucker. You drive across a not as compressed as you'd think map of Europe, delivering cargo jobs to whichever city you fancy. On the way, you have to stop when your driver needs sleep, find a petrol station to diesel up your truck, and keep to the job schedule, all without breaking the speed limit, hitting anyone, or running red lights. If you damage your truck, you have to drive to a mechanic and pay for it. If you need a new truck, you have to drive to the dealer to buy it. It doesn't sound like much of a game, you'll say, and you know what? You're right. There's a little sub-game in building up a truck company, hiring drivers and the like, but that's about it. And yet, Euro Truck Sim 2 originally came out in 2012, but it still gets DLC with new trucks and some surprisingly detailed maps of more and more countries. You can, if you like, drive right from Turkey to the tip of Iceland in one journey. There are mods total conversions. There's an API available to allow you to plug in an absurd number of hardware and software extras. It didn't take me much effort to write a second screen dashboard that constantly lets me know if I'm running ahead of time, and even whether I'm going to need to stop to sleep or fill up before the end of the current job. And the radio stations. Euro Truck Sim can stream. And it can stream appropriate stations based on where you are currently physically located in-game. During the height of the game's meme popularity in the mid-2010s, one late-night radio show realised that the majority of their listeners were doing so from within the game, and started doing shout-outs to them.
A big hello to all you truckers out there.
The best description I ever heard of the game was it was the world's most elaborate Winamp plugin. I would consider myself a casual player over the years, and yet I've played 80 hours of it. I say this because at the time of typing, the first review Steam presents me for the title is the only review Lizanne901 has ever left on Steam. They have played it for 1,272 hours of their life, about 4 months of waking time, and they describe it as good. The 500,000 reviews on Steam are overwhelmingly positive. Friend of the channel and fellow sim fiend Timberwolf and I have talked about doing a Top Gear style race across the whole map, having disabled the speed limiters on the trucks, and if you'd like us to ever do that, do shout in the comments. Which is to say, there is a market for simulations of things that you wouldn't think should be simulated. And you could make the argument that while long distance trucking isn't obvious, it's still basically just a driving game, and you'd be right. But the genre has started to go mainstream. Power Wash Simulator was one of the games of last year, and that is literally about spraying dirty things with water. Although, without spoiling, the fact I said without spoiling tells you that Power Wash Simulator has a lot more to it than you might think on first examination. Still, it was a breakout universal hit, to the point where it now has DLC based on Tomb Raider, Final Fantasy, and SpongeBob SquarePants. This isn't new territory for developers FutureLab, of course. Their previous game was the even more esoteric PC Building Simulator, a title which had DLC with real hardware from a bunch of big names in PC componentry. You may also be aware of House Flipper from Empyrene, which, like PC Building Simulator, carries very positive reviews on Steam. And of course, various iterations of the absurdly nerdy train simulator games often pop up in internet streams and support an entire DLC economy. Recent years have also brought Farm Simulator and Lawn Mowing Simulator into the console consciousness. These are the breakthrough games, of course, but the PC has been doing this for a long time, with more and more weird excuses for things to simulate. An early bus simulator was part of the cover DVD, and in fact there's multiple competing series of that. A scroll through my bundle enhanced decade-old Steam account brings many more. Before Farm Simulator, there was Agricultural Simulator. There's Demolition Simulator, Car Mechanic Simulator, Dig It, Firefighters, Tank Simulator, New York Bus and Taxi Simulators, and Flughafen Feuerwehr. Airport firefighters to you and me. PC Gamer this month might have the most mundane sounding of the lot, even more so than the genuinely existing Warehouse and Logistics Simulator. The lowest score in the issue is the attractive sounding Garbage Truck Simulator 2011. Nothing against the fine people who pick up the refuse, of course. It's a difficult and necessary job that I am 100% sure does not pay as well as it should. But you'd also assume that even beyond the other simulated activities we just talked about, it's a repetitive and free of peril task. Speaking of repetitive tasks, whoever writes the music for these sim games, they all sound the same. I wouldn't be surprised if there's one person who does the lot. It's like those signs for independent fried chicken shops in the UK. None of them are owned by the same group, but it's basically one guy that does the signs for all of them. Maybe the same is true of Sims. Maybe the guy who does those signs also does this music. I wonder if you ever walk into North Dakota Fried Chicken and the theme from Euro Truck Sim 2 is playing. I actually captured this last because thanks to an almighty screw-up, the main capture has no sound. But then the game barely does either, so instead, let's play more sim music. I keep bringing up ETS2, but there's a reason for that. It's the breakthrough game where these things became mainstream, and it does that by being very smart about what it shows you. You start ETS as a contract driver. You just pick a job and get straight in a rental truck it gives you on a drive from X to Y to earn a bit of cash. Garbage Truck, like many sims, insists on you setting everything up before you have a bloody clue what's going on. My company name? Buying a truck? Even excitingly the choice of bin! The details aren't super helpful either. Vehicle type? Garbage truck. Brilliant. It supports 1440p, which is impressive, but you select it and for some reason all the labels disappear in the menu, which is less impressive. 15 minutes of restarting and clicking options blindly eventually solves this, and we can start our company, called exactly what my game tells me to call it. Our first job is simple. Drive to a street, collect 8 bins and return, but as we pull out of the depot at 3 AM, it's just not going to be that simple. In fact, it's not going to be that simple to get out of the depot, and I find myself trapped because I didn't notice the single near identical fence panel that's actually a gate. Even for 2011. Even for a 2011 sim, this game is not a looker. Original spec ETS wasn't a looker either, but it managed to sense a place this never has. Out on the street, after a minor damaging incident, you have to find your way to the job without a sat-nav, but with only a crow flies line on a map that doesn't really show you where the streets are to guide you. It doesn't tell you how far you're going, it doesn't even really tell you where. I can't see where the pavement is either, because while the game apparently has headlights, they do not seem to work in any meaningful way. I think this might be partially the graphics engine simply not liking modern machines. I get pinged for exceeding a speed limit it's not told me about by either GPS or signs, and the lighting model means you have to be right on it to see a traffic light is red in time. I realise the destination is across the river, and while the game will ping you for red lights, speeding and any damage to property, it apparently has exactly no trouble with me safaring it up a steep slope and along a pedestrian footpath to avoid figuring out the actual way to do this. It takes me well over 3 hours of game time to reach the first job, more than once losing the destination line. And this is theoretically the first mission in the game, whereupon I need to figure out how to get out of the truck to do a collection. This is a problem, because it seems that button is nowhere in the instructions. It tells you that the walking around is apparently ego mode, but that's about it. There's no instruction for actually doing it. In desperation, I recreate every 80s sitcom ever and accidentally turn the wipers on, and I discover that the driving mode has a threaten button, which is possibly the most realistic thing in the entire game. But no control for getting out. This ends when I accidentally press the button that's supposed to reset you to the nearest road if you get lost, and it teleports me into mid-air above a random street somewhere else on the map. I can't move, I can't get out, and I've no idea where we are. The help key says no instructions available. No kidding, game. I suddenly have even more respect for my friendly local refuse collectors if this is what they have to battle with every morning. But the serious point is you shouldn't play this, and you should be wary of any of the many low-budget sim games from many developers, because a lot of them have a tendency to be this way. It's one thing to simulate a mundane thing, but games like this that are technically held together with duct tape and hope, and throw many irrelevant things at you in the name of realism, are all too common. For all its nerdy reputation, something like Euro Truck Sim is a surprisingly slimmed down experience. It's understandable, it's relatable, it throws a good way to get driving tunes at you, and it eases you in. More to the point, it also gives you all the information you need and would have in reality. Even without add-ons, you know the speed limits, you can see the lights, the sat-nav works. You don't have to make decisions you don't want to. It's simulating the mundane, sure, but it's relaxing. Power Wash Simulator is an even better example of this in action. Garbage Truck isn't. They've not put any game thought into it at all, and it shows. If you judge Sims based on this kind of thing before, you really should try some of the good ones. but like any genre of gaming, 90% of them, if you'll excuse yet another pun from this show, are trash. On the back page, we say the cover disc is dead, and as a pure cover mount it is, but not quite. Enter Amiga Addict, an Amiga-only magazine not only surviving but thriving in 2023 to the extent you can buy a copy in your local WH Smith. They have a cover disc of sorts, in that you download an image and have to copy it to your own Amiga floppy if you want to use it. If you're a print subscriber, they will at least send you the label for it. It's the closest you'll get in 2023. An Addict is worth a look if you're interested in the Amiga well after Commodore is dead, buried, resurrected, died again, put on display in a museum, and then the museum burnt down. They cover the now, but also don't kid themselves it's the Amiga's heyday, and also cover the past. And many fine people are involved, including friend of the show Yawning Angel, whose Amos tutorials take me, and I'm sure many of you, back. Give Amiga Addict a try. It's 23 issues in and shows no signs of slowing down. And neither do we. In fact, given this was a 5-week month and next month is just 4, we're technically speeding up. Join us next month for a magazine we've seen before, but a game I've never seen. Bye now.